Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our little Viva La Visa broadcast about visas and all things Brexit connected to visas. Sorry, with slight technical hitches here that we're a couple of minutes late, but apologies for that. But hopefully that won't interrupt or spoil your enjoyment too much. Please, as usual, if you have any questions, please send them in through the chat, and our extensive team here will deal with them, and we will endeavour to answer them. On the other hand, if there's anything that we haven't answered during the session, please feel free to email us or Facebook message us, preferably email. That can be either to andy@vivalavisa.co.uk or to hello@vivalavisa.co.uk. It's come up there, and yeah, we will endeavour to answer your questions. Now, I hope lots of you were on our previous broadcast back in January, and this is kind of a broadcast to follow up from what we said then, and to see how things had changed in the intervening 2 months. And obviously, that the last time we spoke, it was just after Brexit and just after the trade agreement, and it looked like the hoped for concessions to the music and broader creative industries from in the trade agreement had not happened, and we were back to square one with there were being basically no concessions from the EU towards travel or anything else for the music and creative industries. So to sum up where we're at, first of all, travel from the UK to the EU. Broadly speaking, the same overall principles apply in that travel is permitted. The UK has the same has a third country status in regard to the EU. That's the same as the US or Canada or Japan and many other countries, in that at first sight, no visas are required to enter the EU for visits of up to 90 days in a period of 180 days. So that's in half a year. After the 180 days have expired, then your 90-day allocation resets itself. Quite why this rule was introduced is not, is kind of hidden in the mists of time and EU negotiation. But it's there, and apparently it's one that the EU they're pretty fixed on, and they're stuck on this. There are a few arcane anomalies and kind of things that go against this, which is a rule for Americans that dates back to 1949, and a rule and an agreement made just after the Second World War, whereby Americans can stay in the EU for an extra 90 days. Or rather in France for an extra 90 days, which means they can stay in the EU for an extra 90 days. But the French, I don't believe, like it, and it's not much used. But in terms of the UK, it's 90 in 180. Now, in that visa-free period, you're allowed to do certain activities, which includes business, travel for pleasure, or promotion, or talking about work, but not any paid work or any kind of employment. And as we discussed before, I think a long time ago, many countries, what happens in EU immigration is set up that the Schengen Agreement, which is a treaty between most of the EU countries plus a few others that aren't in the EU but are in Europe, that they will have a common immigration policy and require certain countries to have visas to enter. And this visa is a common visa, although it's issued by one country, it gets you into the rest of the area. But underneath that, the Schengen Agreement, every country, every territory in the EU has can set its own individual arrangements in particular in regard to requirements for permissions to work in that country. And so every single one of the 26 countries has their own set of regulations and rules, and most of them are kind of drafted. Like most legal documents are drafted, they're quite complicated and quite obscure and quite difficult to understand for the most part. However, most of those countries have some kind of an exception for travel for people coming in to perform, and the support staff for those people coming in to perform. So that includes musicians and their crews. It includes people shooting films and their support staff, people fashion people doing fashion shoots. Includes theatre productions and all kinds of all related activities. And the way that those countries have their regulations drawn up varies from country to country. Some of them have very straightforward, very easy to understand regulations, particularly France, which has a very good system and says that, includes names nearly all the activities and says that if you're coming into France to do these things, you can come in for up to 90 days without any permit or any other requirements. You can just come in and do them, and that's fine. Germany has a similar one, as do many of the other countries. Some countries however, have strict requirements that need to be adhered to. In particular, the one that's come up the most is the most prominent is Spain. And Spain have decided, although this regulation was on their books, it's been on for quite some time, that in order to work in Spain for a short period of time, you require a visa, and a visa, that means that you require a document to enter the country in order to undertake this activity. And again, it's the regulations surrounding it are complicated, and the amount of time you're allowed to perform in Spain is restricted. The restriction is you're allowed to go into Spain for up to 20 days in a 6-month period of performance plus 5 rehearsal days. And in order to do this, they say that a work permit is not required, but a visa in lieu of work permit is required. And this visa is like a normal Schengen visa, which is called a C-type visa, and means it's issued by it's issued in this country. It's issued by the organization or the company that the Spanish consulate subcontracts its visa issuing to, and it's a relatively straightforward process, and it has a fee of €80, but it does require a personal appearance for biometric information to be taken. So it's a bit of a faff. But it's doable. It appears to take about 2 weeks to do, and then there's the second underneath that is if your 20 days of performance are taking place over a longer period than the 6 months, and then there's another category of visa that you must apply for, which is a D visa, which must be applied for via the Spanish consulate, and the requirements for this are somewhat more onerous, as it requires a police certificate and a medical certificate. So that's quite a complicated process, but that appears to be how it is. Other countries it appeared on face value, so what we've been doing over the last weeks and months is going through and trying to speak with every one of these countries to try and find out what the requirements are. And in some cases, unfortunately, what's come back is information that's slightly at odds with what their published information is. For instance, in Portugal, according to they often go with Spain in terms of their requirements. According to the Portuguese consulate website, a visa and work permit are required for short-term performance working. However, the embassy came back to us, in fact, yesterday, and said, no, you don't need it unless you're working directly for a Portuguese company. You don't need a visa or work permit, so you can go in for up to 90 days without that. Now, the problem occurs if you're a large touring band, then your salary will be paid by the touring company, and the touring company will be contracting with the promoter, so there will be no direct employment relationship. However, if you're a single, crew person or a designer or something, and you're working for a Portuguese theatre company, say, then you would be working for it, and so would be working directly for a Portuguese company. So in theory, you would need a work permit and visa. Again, it's anomalous, but I think that we're trying to be. I think that reading between the lines, which unfortunately we can't really rely on that. I think the embassy were trying to be helpful and say, well, it's okay, but I think we have to tread carefully and make sure that we do our kind of belt and braces about these things at the moment, because we don't know how these things are going to play out. And we've been sort of cataloguing them with the various people that we've been speaking with and our various clients. And in terms of several anomalies have come up, and a lot of the problems that have come up have been in connection with COVID travel restrictions, and most of Europe has in place, as does the UK, restrictions on travel due to COVID, requiring quarantine and bans on entry for various activities, and these seem to be getting mixed up with the immigration requirements. For instance, we had the situation occurred in Belgium, which has a requirement that is permit-free for internationally renowned artists. And we had some classical musicians that were applying for COVID permission to go into Belgium, for quarantine permission not to quarantine, to go in and perform. And they were told by the embassy that work permits were required. And then it took a lot of back and forth for them to agree that in point of fact they were wrong and work permits were not required and people were admitted. So there's quite a lot of that situation. We've had situations in Sweden, and these are all territories that historically, when bringing in US and bands, artists from around the world that haven't needed visas, have not been a problem. They haven't been a problem at all. And also when we've been bringing in artists that have needed visas, they've got their visa issued by the main country, and then they've had the contracts and itineraries for the other countries, and there's never been a question of work permits being required. They've just gone in and done it. So there's an element of whether it's people from this end stirring the hornet's nest and asking kind of thing, or it's more likely it's kind of a bit of maybe bad feeling from the EU that right, we're going to dust off some of these regulations and implement them. But I think we can't afford to just say, well, it's probably okay, because when there's a lot riding on it, we can't afford to have people being turned away at borders by some regulation. So that's the situation. We had a situation in Sweden where there's a permit exemption for promoters who are on the list. And this hasn't happened in Sweden before for large pop performers, because there's an organisation of agents and promoters in Sweden headed up by Thomas Johansson, who used to be ABBA's manager back in the day, and there's an understanding between him and the immigration authorities that everything's okay. But there's a list of promoters that you're supposed to be on in order to have this permit-free situation. We had we heard of a classical performer trying to go in and being told by the promoter, no, I'm not on the list, and I can't get on the list. So no, you can't. So the trip was cancelled, which is exactly what we don't want to have. So I think it's a problem. I think that these things are hopefully will come more to the fore, because we're in the situation of still not very many people are traveling, and obviously that not many of these things are being tested, and certainly no large pop music productions or large theatre productions of any kind are going out at the moment. So the things haven't been tested. In terms of and we're also noticing that the regulations, the COVID regulations, entry regulations, are changing fairly constantly, country by country. We're noticing them particularly as we're working in the fashion industry, and lots of fashion shoots have been looking for, which often would shoot in France and in Italy, have been looking at other destinations to go to, where the restrictions are not not quite so hard to get in there. They've been shooting. A lot of people have been shooting in Greece recently, so, and because that seems to have been working. Or again, of 2 days ago, the Italians have relaxed their quarantine restrictions, and are now permitting, with certain permissions, people to go in there for short-term working. Okay, so that's how it's looking. I think it's still on a country by country in terms of how how these things are being lobbied for and trying to negotiate. I think what's happening is that the broader petitions and movements to try and get an EU-wide exemption from the need for visas and work permits is going on. And I know that there hasn't been a lot of, there's been quite a bit of kind of intransigence from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport and the government in response to this, and that their answer has been slightly unhelpful. We are engaging with the industry, and they possibly feel that's enough. So I think what has been happening also is that there's been a lot of conversations between the people in the individual countries, the promoters, and some of whom are quite powerful players in the industry there, because obviously when the bigger tours start touring hopefully in the summer, the amounts of money involved are very, very large, and money talks, as they say. So that's going on. They're going on a bilateral level, and it seems that hopefully things will be able to be negotiated. We heard that in particular the situation in Spain. I know I'll go on about this one, but it's the one that's the most difficult. And also I've been told that I didn't realise it, that Spain is the second biggest market for UK music in Europe, which I was surprised, but apparently it is a big market, and there's a lot of UK music goes to Spain. I know we're dealing with bookings for a lot of DJs going out who want to work in Spain a lot over the summer period. Obviously they're working in Ibiza and Spanish territories, and are looking to have a situation where they can go in and out over a period of several months, which I'll come to that scenario in a second. But it appeared that with Spain, what happened was early last year, there was a lot of publicity in the Spanish press raised by Spanish music, classical music artists, that the story went that the Spanish musicians are going to be penalised and have to pay for visas to enter the UK after Brexit, and this was kind of misinformation, because that isn't in fact the case. There are routes for periods of up to 3 months by which the cost is fairly minimal, and maybe that publicity, that misinformation in the Spanish media led to the Spanish authorities saying, right, we're going to impose these restrictions on UK people. And while the EU regulations, the pan-EU regulations, say that countries are not supposed to penalise one country over another and impose immigration restrictions on one country that they don't impose on another, it seems to be the case that what's happening is how that they present the information. Certainly the Spanish presented the information on their website. They put a whole new page in for the UK, listing these requirements if you were going in for particular purposes, and if you're an artist, model going in to do this, what you needed. And these regulations are not on, say, the New York Spanish consulate website. There's some mention of these visa categories buried there, but it's not right there in your face. So it does seem there's a certain amount of kind of singling out going on there. And sorry, lost my thread. So moving on. So in terms of the negotiations. So negotiations are going on between the Spanish promoters associations and UK ones. But obviously, a lot of the Spanish promoters in other countries have not come across these restrictions before. So it's in a way it's as much news to them as it is to us. As I mentioned before, people wanting to go to Spain for periods of longer than 90 days. And it's a situation, the 90-day thing has come up in quite a few questions that people have asked us, because quite a lot of crew people end up spending more than 90 days. If you're doing back-to-back European tours, it's quite conceivable that your amount of time you need to spend in the EU goes over the 90 days in 180. And if you go on, plus your holiday, and also these things are compounded by regulations regarding quarantine. If you're going to have to quarantine for 10 days in a country, that adds to your your 90 days. It runs against your total, and so it's quite easy to go over. And while I think that people need to be mindful of going over the number of days, because although it might not have an immediate effect, it may well be, because it will be recorded on your entry and exit, electronically by the border control, and it may come and come up to bite you down the line. We're not sure how it's going to work, but we know, having heard anecdotally, that the EU is strict on enforcing that regulation. Oh no, I know at the same time it's an imperfect one for them to do, and there probably are many ways of people avoiding it, because there are no internal borders in the EU, and you can drive around Europe and probably not come to any border control, although they do have the right to impose them. And I've had situations, I've been there myself, when I've been 50 miles into France from the Dutch border and then been pulled over, but just by police, on the road, saying we followed you from, what are you doing, kind of thing. But I know that's quite unusual. So moving on, so that's the situation with Europe. It's country by country basis. It seems that more and more countries were getting clarity that they can, you can travel permit free. Problems are, as we said, if you're going over for over the 90 days. So going back to my point there, there is no kind of pan-European long-term work visa. It doesn't exist. If you think you're going to be more than the 90 days in the EU, the solution is, or the best solution is, to get a long-term visa issued by one country that will permit you to stay in that country for the period of duration of the visa, which can be a year, sometimes longer. And your time in that country doesn't count against your 90 and 180. So that's the way to do it. In terms of which countries are easier to do that, that varies. But you do have they have varying requirements as to what proof of employment you need there, and how much time you need to spend in the country. The one that seems to be the most liberal at the moment is the French one, who have a category called a talent passport, which is available to either employed people or freelancers, and requires you to have a sort of proof that your status, that you are, you do qualify as a creative or support person to creatives. And it's broadly drawn. It can be any kind of discipline. It can be music or art or theatre or dance or fashion, whatever. And that will, and you have to show that you have some activity in France, and that is a relatively straightforward process. Takes a couple of weeks, and it has a fee of only 100 quid, just over 100 quid, depending on the exchange rate, and that seems to be been getting approved, and without too much problem. Although you do have to provide a fair amount of support documentation, and that has the advantage not only of not counting against your 90 and 180 in terms of your time in the EU. It means that you, in terms of the current French COVID regulations, you don't have to quarantine going into France. You get lumped in with the French nationals in that category. We've been processing quite a few of those visas for both for musicians that spend time in France and for photographers, fashion people, those kind of people, and they seem to be working out fine. Other countries have similar arrangements, but a lot of EU countries are just not issuing visas at the moment. It's like Germany, it just isn't issuing visas, and quite a few other countries, they're just not doing it. And they say they're going to start again, when COVID relaxes, which hopefully this will be happening in the next 2 or 3 months. So again, it's kind of trying to test the water and see, because sometimes until you can fulfill all the criteria for the visa, but until it's submitted, it's quite difficult to know what duration, because sometimes you will apply for a duration and they'll give you quite arbitrarily, they'll give you a shorter duration on that. So those are the solutions. There is no great panacea visa to travel around Europe freely, but it has to be done on a country by country basis. If you've got long periods of you're going to be spending a long period of time in more than one territory, it's possible to get more than one long stay visa for it. But you can get one for, say you can get one for France and you get one for Italy. You can get more than one. That's possible. But again, it's a process you have to go through. In terms of also the rest of, in terms of Europe, the other thing that was obviously has changed, apart from the movement of people, is the movement of goods. And I think we discussed in the last thing that carnets are required for the passport for goods is required for the movement of any professional equipment in and out of the EU. These are relatively straightforward to obtain. Again, if anyone has any issues or would like any assistance, we assist with issuing of carnets and can advise as well as issue them for you. It can be done in a couple of days, and it can last. The validity can be for up to a year. And in terms of what you're allowed to, what you can't do with a carnet, in terms of you can't add stuff to your list, you can't add equipment to your list, but there is a provision for you can have a list and not be taking some items on it, so that you can do it that way. But I think that's just a fact of life. The only kind of concession that was confirmed on the carnet front, and that was done a few weeks ago, was that there is an exemption for personal musical instruments that you carry yourself, that travel with you. If you've got your violin or whatever, a guitar or whatever it may be, probably not your grand piano, and you take that with you, you can go through the green customs channel, and there's no requirement to declare it, and that's fine to bring it in and out. And that applies both to UK law, which is taking it in and out of the UK, and EU law, taking it in and out of the EU. And that was something that was there in the regulations, but it wasn't clear whether it was going to apply. But it's been confirmed that it does in fact apply now. So that's one good thing. There's still the Northern Ireland is obviously a problem that keeps on giving, and the current thinking is that yes, you do need a carnet for equipment to Northern Ireland, and that's the current thinking. Okay, so the other questions are in terms of transport. I don't know how many people here are sort of involved in trucking, but the cabotage regulations, which is the number of drops that a UK trucking company, UK-based truck can make in the EU, is limited to 2, and then or 2 or 3, and then it has to return home, which means that UK trucks can't do pan-European multi-drop tours. Simple as that. And what the trucking companies are doing is setting up European operations, and I think that it seems from the conversation we've had and what we hear from people in like the PSA, who are actively lobbying to try and get this resolved, is that kind of that's we're stuck with that one, and that's how it's going to be, and that the European trucking companies are rubbing their hands together and saying, great, here, we'll make hay. And that's kind of how that is. It seems that the cabotage doesn't apply to buses, and doesn't apply to splitter vans, but it depends on, again, the rules are, if you're carrying merchandise for sale, stuff for sale in your splitter van, then does that count as freight, and so the cabotage rules applying. But it would be you'd be very, very unlucky to get pulled over and it would require a very knowledgeable police person to pull you over and stop you for that. But anyway, the rules are complicated and fairly onerous on that side. In terms, I'll touch briefly on Social Security. The Social Security arrangements of not being having double Social Security deductions still apply, and that there's a new scheme, but it appears that not everyone. I thought that everyone had, all the EU countries had signed up to it. It appears not the case, that they haven't yet, but I think that they will. In terms of if you need to get the equivalent of the A1 form, if you go on the government website and just Google A1, it will take you to that page, and it will tell you how to apply for the current the current version of the form and how to do it if you're self-employed or employed and you're temporarily working in the EU. It will guide you through that process, and so on. I don't know, Andrew, do we have any? I'll just check my team here. Have we had any questions come in? Okay. All right. A question from, yes, I'll do some questions now, and then I'll talk about coming into the other way around, coming into the UK. A question from Liam Tucker: can you do the biometric once or every time? You have to, Liam. You have to, like all visa applications, you have to do the biometrics for every application, I'm afraid. Yeah, sorry, that's how it is. But this at the moment only the EU only applies to Spain. We're trying to get some clarification, because in terms of other countries' visa processing, that there are other countries have sort of streamlined their process to make it more convenient to do the biometrics, to do the biometrics. And we're hoping that when the Spanish one is either negotiated away, which is a possibility, or is becomes more commonplace, that we'll find ways of making it a bit more streamlined. But at the moment, it's you've got to do it, and you've got to do it every time. And obviously, the cost implication there is that it means travelling to. It's not just London. They do have regional centres for it in the UK. So it's not just. It's not purely a case of travelling to London to do it. So it's not as bad as it may seem. Okay. Oh, I had a question from Joe Meekums. Cabotage, can you clarify on a bus towing a trailer? Thanks, Joe. My understanding that a bus towing a trailer, I think the last one, when I spoke with Andy from PSA, that it probably is, yes, that it probably would be regarded as freight, but I still think there's something of a question mark over that. What we'll do is, again, I've been loath to put up this kind of statements on our social media saying that this is how it is, when it's kind of been up in the air. And in terms of regulations, we don't want to publish stuff until we're fairly sure that that's the case. But the last conversation we had, which is with Andy, was with yesterday, was yes, bus with trailer is cabotage, yes, afraid so. Oh, one question from Chris Fitch. Hello, Chris. How are you? In relation to inbound movement of EU crew to the UK, I was going to get onto the inbound stuff. Thank you for preempting me, Chris. Is Tier 5 suitable for EU-based crew to be able to work in the UK? Can a service company such as Scan be a sponsor for Tier 5 visa, and would it need to be an artist? Is there any difference for Irish citizens because of the free travel arrangement area? What are the costs? Right. First of all, Tier 5 is suitable if they can be described as creative. I think we have done Tier 5s for engineers, lighting designers. So broadly, yes. Yes, they can. Yes, they can be. And the question has, the rest of the question has gone from my screen now. Yeah, thank you. Put it back up. Yes, it is. Yes, broadly it is. Yes, but we'd have to justify each person. We have to say, we have to do as the sponsor, as a sponsor, you would have to check into them and say, yes, that this person does qualify, that they are sufficiently high ranking in their home country to fit the bill. And can Scan be? Yes, Scan can be registered as a sponsor. Yes, they can. You can, if they're working, they could be working, if they're employed but directly by you, that's fine. Or you can still act as their sponsor if they're if they're being paid by the artist, you can still do it. If you'd like help, we can guide you through the process of getting registered. It's a bit painful, but it's probably worth doing. And in terms of the other thing, in terms of issuing, there's a fee. The fee for Tier 5. I'll do a general talk, but I'll answer Chris's question first. So, is there any difference for Irish citizens because of free travel agreement? Yes, Irish citizens are free to come and work in the EU, in the UK, and the EU without any need for any permit or visa. So, they're in probably the best position. Yeah. What are the costs now in terms of So just speak briefly about the system of coming into the UK. In terms of artists and crew coming into the UK, there are a couple of different routes by which they can come in. They can come in for if this talking about musicians, they can come in if they're not being paid. They can come in just as a visitor without anything. And again, if they're EU, they can come in visa free for up to 6 months. We don't have the 90, 180 day rules. It's different being coming to the UK. The visitor, so if you're a French person, you come to the UK and say, I'm coming on my holidays, they'll probably give you 6 months. And under that, they can come in they can perform without being paid for as much as they like in that period. It's not a very likely situation, but it's true. The second route is that if they're coming to perform at a permit-free festival, which means the big uns, because it's hard for small festivals to get on the permit-free list. They don't need anything apart from an invitation to come in and perform there. The third, the most common route is, like Chris mentioned, is the Tier 5, which is a visa under the points-based system, which means that a person has to be sponsored by a UK employer or agent. So it doesn't have to be the direct employer, but there has to be a relationship between you and the person coming in. They have to be able to fit into the creative sector, the creative category, and in theory, there has to be there has to be no one in the UK that can do their job. There's no requirement in Tier 5 to advertise the job or to fulfil any labour market test. And in practice, it can be done. The creative thing is fairly broadly drawn. So yes, I think it can cover crew. They can be regarded, and they can also be slightly less creatives if they're support staff to so if it's crew working for a band, they can be on the artists, support staff of the artist when the creative criterion doesn't quite apply quite so strictly. In terms of how long they can come on this, in theory they can come in for a year, but if they're coming in for a year, they require to have a visa as well. So they'd have to go through the visa process, biometrics in their home country. However, there's an allowance for if they're coming in for 3 months or less, they don't need to have a visa. And there's a concession for that. And the reason I said that last is because if you go on the government website, which hasn't been updated, for us coming to the UK, which hasn't been updated since 2015. So it's kind of out of date. And I guess they are going to, at some point, going to update it. So I think you need to, this needs to be read with care. The website is set out so it starts with the presumption that you need a visa, you need entry clearance to come into the country under this category, and then only at the bottom does it say, well, actually, if you're from this country, you don't need a visa, you just need this. So that's it's slightly misleading, and that's where I think a lot of the misinformation that was in the press, continues to be in the press over the last few months, saying it's going to cost you £244 to come in from the EU for a visa to come and perform here. That's where that comes from. And that's only the case if you're going to come in for 3 months or more. If you don't come in for 3 months or less, the cost is normally the cost for, if you're a sponsored license holder, is it costs £21 to issue a Tier 5 certificate of sponsorship, and it's free for EU people. It's free, so there's no cost. However, you do have to do a bit of due diligence because you, as the sponsor, are responsible for, answerable to the government for saying where this person was, and that they are in fact doing what they said they were going to come in and do. So you're responsible for that. But if they don't do what they're supposed to do, you always have the privilege of withdrawing their sponsorship, and it's up to, then it becomes their responsibility. You're no longer responsible for them. So if they go rogue, you can just withdraw that, and no further blame will be apportioned to you. In terms of cost, I think it costs £500 to register for a sponsorship license, and it lasts for 4 years. The other route can come in if you want to employ people on a more permanent basis. You can bring them in under the skilled worker route, which means that you have to pay them a salary. You have to employ them for for a year. Well, I think you can do it for even for less, for 6 months or more. But you'd have to pay them. It'd have to be a fully salaried position, and they would require to have a visa to come in. The only good thing about this, obviously, before, if you employ people from the EU, they didn't need anything. But what's happened is at the end of the year, in a completely separate bunch of legislation, this category used to be called Tier 2. It's now called skilled worker, and it applies to people from all over the world coming in to do jobs. And it has to be a job on the list. It includes musician and sound technician and all sorts of things. So, and what happened was, under the old Tier 2 system, there was a requirement to fulfill a labour market test, in which the job had to be advertised and it had to be advertised in particular ways. And if you didn't advertise it in these particular ways, which weren't appropriate for many kind of job adverts, it would be refused. And that has been done away with. So there's no requirement for a labour market test. You don't have to prove that there's no one in the UK or a settled worker that can do the job. So that's great. Also, they removed the cap on it. There was a cap before, so they only issued so many per month. Now that's gone. So that process has become streamlined. So if you're going to be registered as a Tier 5 sponsor, it's worthwhile getting registered as a skilled worker sponsor at the same time, because in case you want to bring in anyone like that. And that system seems to be working absolutely fine. And the cost, it costs you no more when you register to register for the two categories. There is if you're a very large company, then the fee, employing hundreds of people, then the fee goes up to, I think, about 1,500 quid. But that's that. So that's the routes to come in. So it's not, if you're not being paid, you don't need nothing. If you are being paid, you can come in under, the best route is Tier 5. And if you're long term, you will come in under skilled worker, but you need a visa. The other route is permitted paid engagement, which is a route that was brought in 2012, and the idea, and it's one of those things that was done. It seems it was done without consultation. And going back to the 3-month visa-free thing for Tier 5 was lobbied for by the music industry, and was got by them. So that was an example of lobbying for something and getting it. The permitted paid engagement was brought in, it seems, without any consultation to the people that would be using it. And what it means is that it says if you're coming in for permitted paid engagement, this can be anything from being a performer to being a teacher, lecturer, writer, television presenter, something like that, for up to 1 month, and you don't require any kind of work of permission, providing you have an invitation from the employer and you can prove, documentary proof, that this is what you do at home, this is your profession, and this is what you do. And that's, in theory, that's great. And you can come in for up to a month, and that's fine, but no longer than a month. And this is fine, but this is kind of decided at the border. There's no kind of pre-approval. So while it appears to work most of the time, it's down to the person at the border to administer it and say yes or no, you can come in. And we've known cases where they've got it wrong and not admitted people, and we've had to get them issued with COSs. Not been our clients, but that's happened. It doesn't. So we don't like that system, because the COS system seems to work pretty well, and we've not ever had problems with that. It seems to be totally accepted by border people at face value, because the responsibility is put onto the sponsor, and they can go after the sponsor if something goes wrong. I think that's probably the way they look at it. And in terms of, if you don't have a license, there are companies that will issue, for instance, we do it, and we do it for some small promoters and agents that don't have their own license and don't do very much, and don't feel that they bring in enough people to need it. And we do it for them, and obviously we charge a fee, and it's quite straightforward. The other thing about the COS, that Tier 5, it doesn't take much time. It's quick to issue. It can be done. It can be done almost instantaneously, but it's better to have a couple of days to make sure that the support documentation is in place, because the thing that comes back on the sponsor is that you are likely to get inspected You may get inspected every year. You may not. We know of people who've been done 10 years and have not been inspected, but they will come and they will make sure that they'll go through all your records and make sure that you're compliant and have been doing it the correct way. And when you read through the compliance and requirements, it seems very, very onerous. And it kind of is, because it's not really geared, the regulations are not really geared up to, they're not geared up to how the entertainment industry operates. But it's doable, and it's certainly worth applying and getting that license if you can. Anything else about the UK? In terms of, obviously, the UK at the moment, we've got restrictions on. There are COVID restrictions in place. That means that the no quarantine exemption, which existed until January for certain activities like shooting adverts and things, is no longer there. So people coming in have to quarantine at the moment. Well, we're hoping that will at some point be taken away. And so, any other, while I'm here, any other questions? Okay. I've got a question from Jeremy Graysmark. I don't quite get the cabotage rules. I've got a van with equipment. Do I have to use an EU Sprinter van? Can I keep using my vehicle to? Yes, you can. You can. A van, I believe, is not subject to the cabotage rules because it's of a certain size. So are you trucking for other people? Or are you? The question is, I suggest you ping me an email outside of this, and I will come back to you with the exact rules. Hello at Viva La Visa. We'll come back to you with the exact wording on that one, Jeremy. Anyone else got any other questions while we're here? We've still got a few more minutes. What are the advantages? Oh, right, from John Core. What are the advantages and disadvantages of travelling under an Irish passport by working for a UK company? I say disadvantage is none really. No, can't see of any. In terms of your tax liability, which I didn't touch on this at all. Your tax liability is based on where your tax residence is. In terms of the common and in terms of you shouldn't get double taxation if you're in the common travel area coming to the UK. And in terms of tax, I didn't talk about tax in Europe at all. Again, what's happened with tax and withholding tax for various countries is these regulations are remaining the same. They existed before Brexit, and they have not changed. That remains the same. But no, if you've got an Irish passport, well done you. And yes, you've got the golden ticket. Oh, this is Jeremy Graydon. This is my own equipment I use for my own concerts. I'm pretty sure that because of the size of your vehicle, you will not be subject to cabotage. But please ping me an email, and I will give you the chapter and verse on that. Because again, cabotage is a complicated area. Okay, Chris, are there any limits on the total number of Tier 5 or skilled workers allowed into the UK in any given period? No, there are not. There are no caps on those categories. No, you will be if you have a license. You will have when you apply for your license, you will have to give a number of certificates that you expect to issue in the year. And if you apply for a license, say I want to issue 10,000, they would maybe look at you and say, "Are you sure?" But if you ask, but there's the provision for adding to your allocation or getting further allocation. But no, there's no limit. Okay, and Anna Mack, a second Canadian in the UK shouldn't be affected by the new rules, should they? If you're a Canadian, you're a Canadian. You're subject to your settled status. Doesn't give you any change in how you relate to the EU. No, you would go to the EU as a Canadian, which in theory is the same as a third country national, the same as a UK person. Okay. We've got a couple more minutes. If anyone else got anything they would like to answer? No, Andrew's saying no. So I'll just sum up if I may, and please again I say please message us or email us if you've got any specific questions. To sum up, I think that the situation with the Brexit and the EU is, it's becoming clearer. The jury is still out. We have all sorts of situations coming up that we didn't anticipate, like that there are complicated situations where we're getting at the moment that we didn't, don't fall into the immediate, we're going to this country or we're touring around Europe. Like at the moment, we've got a person we've got a couple of people in this situation who've been offered, who are UK people, been offered a contract by a German company to do some work in the Netherlands. And the question is what requirement, what is required for that? And because this is electrical rather than creative, and so to try and wade through the regulation so they would in theory need a work permit, but how the work permit that they would need, it looked like in this case they would need a work permit issued by Germany that allowed them to work in a trans-border job in Holland. And that's relatively straightforward. We've got a similar situation where another person is working for, again, a German company in Spain, and the situation there is not so clear cut because Holland has a regulation allowing for trans-border worker to work from a non-EU trans-border worker to work in Holland, whereas Spain doesn't. So they're getting all these kind of anomalous situations and weird ones that we just didn't know, we're just not anticipating. And because of the relationship between the UK and US and places and Europe, it didn't occur, because the people weren't popping back and forth. We've got questions with the UK about people that coming in and out. If they're going to come in and out on permitted paid engagement, they're not really supposed to do that. Particularly we have people who perform in orchestras who used to virtually commute from the EU to the UK, and now difficulties seem to be it's probably going to be difficult for them to do that, and it's not clear what route and what regulation they should follow. So I think things are becoming clearer. Hopefully over the next couple of months things will will become more clear as to what the regulations are and what the restrictions are, and hopefully when the more large-scale economic factors come into play, and the large tours and festivals are occurring in Europe, then these things will be resolved, and maybe exceptions will be made because there'll be financial pressure. I guess if Coldplay are going to be touring football stadiums in Spain, it's millions and millions of dollars at stake, and so they don't, it's in no one's interest to restrict that. But I think until that happens, we're kind of, most of the problems that we're seeing occurring are problems with small scale, and as often it is the case, it's the small person at the end of the line who doesn't have the resources to put this, the problem onto someone else, has to deal with it all themselves, who bear the brunt of it, and also a lot of the what we're also trying to do is to try and talk with lots of small promoters over Europe to try and get them, so we're all on the same page, we'll have the same information, because what we're finding is that a lot of the time they don't know the regulations either, and why should they? And they are under resourced. So to try and share our knowledge with them, because I think the more we all, everyone involved understands and knows, I think the better the situation will be. And I know that there is talk of the government setting up a kind of, again, whether this will happen, hopefully it will, a kind of an export office, a music export office, which will be hopefully will be providing funds for people, like if you're a small band and you have to, you're doing some shows in Spain and it's going to cost you 800 quid in visas, there will be, hopefully there'll be money available to cover that. As simple as that. We've been lobbying to try and get that put in place, and it looks, they've been kind of nodding their heads and saying, yeah, this is a good idea, because it doesn't involve any, it doesn't involve any politics, and it doesn't involve a reciprocal thing of getting the Home Office to agree to lift restrictions on coming into the UK, which obviously, is going to be difficult. But I think, I think hopefully that we can be fairly positive and things will get better. And hopefully as the industry comes back together over the summer, we will be in a better place. Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you very much for listening. And any questions, please come back to us. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.